The Miami Heat is one of the most decorated franchises in the entire NBA. Pat Riley, we all know he's a winner. He's won at every single level. And he's definitely brought that same old school mentality that he has to this Miami Heat franchise. Winning 3 NBA championships, 2 in the past decade, and 1, of course, in 2006. But over the last 5 years, the Miami Heat has definitely had some ups and downs. But the Heat are back and better than ever with a new direction, and today I'm going to discuss how the Heat transformed their roster back into title contenders in just about 5-6 years. Enjoy. The 2013-14 NBA season was a significant season for the Miami Heat, that offseason, of course, because they had the big three, LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh, and they were on their last leg. And they lost a tough series that year against the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA Finals, winning 2 out of 2 NBA championships. But the Miami Heat weren't really expected to keep LeBron James. He was expected to leave the Heat. And Dwayne Wade was suffering from injuries, and Chris Bosh was just Chris Bosh at the time. And the future was uncertain for the Heat team. Yes, they can go back to the NBA Finals, possibly, but they would probably never be that same team that they once were on. Meanwhile, they had a perfect situation going on with the Cavaliers. They weren't a terrible team. They were led by Kyrie Irving, one of the most exciting young and upcoming point guards at the time. And not to mention that, but the Cavaliers had the first pick in that year's NBA draft, so they could use that pick to also trade for another all-star caliber player. And this is exactly what happened. Kevin Love was traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and of course LeBron James resolved the issues that he had with Dan Gilbert, and he signed a 2-year, $42 million contract to join the Cleveland Cavaliers, leaving the Miami Heat. And at the time, this was detrimental for the Miami Heat. Losing a guy like LeBron James, what success, what will the future be for this Heat franchise without LeBron? A guy that literally helped carry them to an NBA Finals. And you all saw what happened to Cleveland after losing LeBron. Would this same outcome happen for this Miami Heat franchise, even with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh? Well, actually, the Heat were expected to still be a pretty good team in the playoff mix. Chris Bosh was close to signing with the Houston Rockets, but the Heat gave Bosh a max contract and he stayed with the Heat. And they were also able to pick up Luol Deng and Goran Dragic, 2 players who were still considered all-star caliber players at that time. You still had Dwayne Wade as well, but obviously that season, the Miami Heat, it was a very tough one because they lost Chris Bosh, one of their top scorers, to blood clots after the All-Star break, which was detrimental for this Miami Heat team and especially for their success into making the playoffs. And they finished with a 37-45 record. And missing the playoffs was definitely something that was unexpected for this Miami Heat team because they were expected to still possibly be in that playoff mix. But luckily for the Heat, they had Hassan Whiteside at the time, and he definitely showed promise on what the type of player he could possibly be for this Miami Heat franchise. That season, losing Chris Bosh to blood clots and Dwayne Wade still being at a certain high level, he wasn't going to be able to carry that Miami Heat team to the playoffs. At the time, the Miami Heat, they were not trying to rebuild the roster. They still were trying to contend and compete for an NBA championship. That offseason, the Miami Heat re-signed Goran Dragic to a 4-year, $90 million contract. The Heat also had a lottery pick drafting Justice Winslow out of Duke. He was a promising player for the Miami Heat, and he had high expectations. And the Heat also drafted Josh Richardson out of the second round. And one thing that we know what makes the Heat such a great place to play is that they are able to really develop players and guys that we've never even heard of, and they end up becoming some of the most solid basketball players in the entire NBA. And Josh Richardson is a good example of one of those guys today. The Miami Heat have done this for a very long time now on developing players and really getting the best out of all of them. In the 2015-16 NBA season, the Heat finished with a 48-34 record, and they made it to the second round, losing in 7 games to the Toronto Raptors, meaning they could have met up with the Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference Finals that year, possibly. But this season alone was definitely one of Dwayne Wade's last really great seasons for this Miami Heat franchise, and what all he's able to do for them. But the topic that dominated that offseason was about paying Dwayne Wade. That offseason, Dwayne Wade wanted his money. For his entire career, Dwayne Wade was sacrificing numerous pay cuts to help his Miami Heat team compete each season. He wanted his money and he felt like he deserved it. But Pat Riley wasn't trying to pay Dwayne, who was 34 years old at the time, past his prime, and looking at it from a logical perspective, it made perfect sense. But when you look at it from the perspective that Dwayne Wade was loyal to this Heat franchise, and he helped them win 3 NBA championships, not to mention him winning Finals MVP for one of them and having one of the greatest Finals performances of all time, why wouldn't you pay him? Because of this, Pat Riley and Dwayne Wade could never resolve on this issue, so they could never come to terms of getting a good deal done. And because of that, Dwayne Wade went to go play for the Chicago Bulls, where they pay him the money that what he felt like he deserved. This was shocking to the entire NBA at the time. Dwayne Wade leaving the Heat, who ever even heard of that even coming at the time? Nobody. But Dwayne Wade did something that was best for him at the time. Also, though, Chris Bosh at the time was still suffering from blood clot issues. It got worse, and they came back on him, and he did come back for a brief period of time that next season for the Miami Heat, but he was never really the same player. He was optimistic for his return in 2016, but things were never the same from that point on. In September of 2016, Bosh failed his physical exam, and he was not cleared to play for the team or participate in training camp. On September 26th, the Heat president Pat Riley said that the team viewed Bosh's career with the Heat as over. This was a sad time for NBA fans and for Chris Bosh, who obviously was a Hall of Famer caliber player, and he still is to this day. But the fact is, the matter is that he re-signed with the Heat and still looking to compete for an NBA championship, and he still has some solid playing days still ahead of him. Sadly, health issues is what suffered Chris Bosh in the end, but that's something he obviously can't control. Despite losing Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, the show still must go on. In the 2016-17 NBA season was a very mediocre year for the Miami Heat. The Heat re-signed Hassan Whiteside to a 4-year, $98 billion contract. The Heat expected Whiteside to take that new level to his game that what he was showing at the time, and the Heat also re-signed Tyler Johnson to a 4-year, $50 million contract. So yeah, the Heat, they were trying to keep as much talent on their roster as they could, because the Heat weren't really about rebuilding. And the team got off to an 11-30 start. However, the Heat rallied to go on a 30-11 stretch at the end of the season, only to be eliminated after the last game of the season, which was very detrimental at the time. And I remember recalling seeing Eric Spoelstra pretty much emotional and crying about that situation of the Heat barely just missing the playoffs. But despite that, Hassan Whiteside, as I discussed in a video I recently made about him, after re-signing that big contract with the Miami Heat, he just lost his hunger and grind and drive to really improve his game. He was never really the same player from that point on, and the locker room issues with him and the organization really began to come for him, and things did not get better for him, as we all know, as time went by. Josh Richardson was definitely at this time developing and improving his game, and Justice Winslow, he still really never made that push to being that player what we thought he could possibly be. The 2017-18 NBA season was another pretty interesting season for the Miami Heat because in the 2017 NBA draft, the Miami Heat selected Bam Adebayo with the 14th pick. Bam was the first piece to the Heat's now new bright future. On February 8th, 2018, the NBA trade deadline, the Heat reacquired Dwayne Wade, finally, paying respect to the man who gave his all to that organization. And on April 9th, 2018, the Heat clinched the playoff berth for the 8th time in the last 10 years. Furthermore, they won their division on April 11th as a result of an overtime win against the Toronto Raptors. And the Heat, they finished that season with a 44-38 record, which clinched the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference playoffs. But the Heat lost to the Philadelphia 76ers in 5 games. But the good part about this season was that the Miami Heat had Dwayne Wade back on their roster. And that's where he belonged. Miami Heat, that was Dwayne's home. Miami was his home. And that was the place where he wanted to finish his NBA career, obviously. Who else would he want to play for? That offseason, were able to acquire undrafted rookie Duncan Robinson, another Heat player that has helped this Miami Heat team today. And that season was an emotional year for the Heat because it was Dwayne Wade's last season. One of the greatest players to ever play, he gave it his all to that Heat franchise. Winning 3 NBA championships, winning the Finals MVP. He's one of the all-time leading scorers for that team, and he's leading them in a lot of statistical categories. But overall, Dwayne Wade is Miami. That is his city. But that season, Josh Richardson definitely solidified himself as a solid player who can definitely be a big threat for this Miami Heat team. Bam Adebayo definitely started showing his promise on how he could be a really great, versatile player for this Heat team. And eventually, he took over the starting position from a complaining Hassan Whiteside at the time. And the Heat finished that season with a very mediocre record, though, of 39-43. But the story for this season was obviously about Dwayne Wade. This was about starting a new generation, though, for this Miami Heat franchise. Moving on from the past and now moving on to a new experience. And he told that same thing about Bam Adebayo, about how he can be really one of the faces of this Miami Heat franchise and the potential that he has and what he's definitely been able to show now. He still had Goran Dragic on the roster, and they still had a lot of good veteran players on this roster, but the Heat, they definitely needed change. The Heat were always in the discussion for a new star player on their roster, and Jimmy Butler, just a few months prior, was saying how he had initial interest in joining the Miami Heat. This offseason was definitely the perfect time, since Butler was a free agent, for the Miami Heat to do that, get Jimmy Butler on their roster. The 2019-20 NBA offseason was a very, very, very huge season for the Miami Heat. In the NBA draft, the Heat selected Tyler Hero with the 13th pick, and the Heat signed undrafted rookie Kendrick Nunn. The Heat were also trying to acquire Jimmy Butler, and he wanted to go to Miami. But the Heat at the time, they had 13 players on the contract for the 2020 NBA season. And they owed about $141 million. And you add first-round pick Tyler Hero's $3.6 million, it hit the cap for the next season. And that number grows to 14 players with a combined team salary of $144 million. That puts the Heat above the 109.14 salary cap. Even over the Jimmy Butler by sending Josh Richardson to the 76ers, Hassan Whiteside to the Portland Trail Blazers, and a protected 2023 first-round pick to the Los Angeles Clippers as part of the trade, which also saw Myers Leonard go to the Heat, giving them some more cap space, and Maurice Harkless going to the LA Clippers. But the Heat were able to free out a lot of cap room, enough for 2 max players, one of those, of course, being Jimmy Butler, but also the Heat getting rid of, as I said, Tyler Johnson, definitely helped the Heat in a huge, huge way. Well, this season we all know what happens next. The Heat has shocked us all. After countless years of mediocre, losing LeBron, signing players to big contracts, some that didn't even deserve them, losing Dwayne Wade, but he eventually came back, drafting and developing players really well, and with some luck, the Heat were able to surprise everybody at the end. The Heat, Pat Riley definitely never was really trying to go into a full-on rebuild with his Heat roster. He was always trying to compete out east in the playoff mix, but he finally did it big, especially this last offseason by acquiring the players who he did. This Heat team is definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. My only hint is about how they're going to pay all these guys. But you have Tyler Hero, who is a young and upcoming star. Bam Adebayo is already an all-star. You have Kendrick Nunn, who's also showing that potential as well of becoming an all-star. You have Duncan Robinson, who's about to enter his prime. You have the mix of veterans, and you have the star Jimmy Butler, and possibly acquiring another star player to win now for this Heat team. They are in good hands for the future, and they aren't going anywhere anytime soon. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Have a great day. Peace.